It was a quiet morning at Willow Creek Elementary, a small school located in a peaceful town in rural Vermont. The autumn leaves, tinged in shades of orange and red, were beginning to pile up on the sidewalks and the schoolyard, creating a serene and welcoming atmosphere. The smell of dry leaves mixed with the subtle aroma of surrounding pine trees was part of the students' daily life, something they had grown accustomed to, making their school unique. That morning, Mrs. Margaret Davis was starting another day of class. The fifth-grade class, composed of energetic and curious children, was already immersed in another science lesson. Mrs. Davis, a middle-aged woman with graying hair and a gentle smile, was enthusiastically explaining the life cycle of plants, trying to keep the attention of her students, who often drifted into the typical daydreams of their age. Among the students was Emily Carter, a 10-year-old girl known for her exemplary behavior and dedication to her studies. Emily was a shy but very observant child. Her large blue eyes reflected a gentle soul, always ready to help others. She enjoyed spending her free time reading books in the school library and was one of the few students who genuinely appreciated Mrs. Davis's science lessons. Another student, Jason Miller, was the opposite of Emily. Jason was a boy full of energy, often restless, with a fertile imagination that led him to get lost in his own thoughts. He was the typical boy who preferred running around the playground to sitting in a classroom, but he had a big heart and a special affection for animals. As Mrs. Davis talked about photosynthesis, an unexpected interruption occurred. The classroom door, which had been left slightly ajar, was pushed open with more force than usual, drawing everyone's attention to the entrance. A curious silence fell over the room when, to everyone's surprise, a dog walked in. It was a medium-sized dog, with brown fur and expressive eyes that seemed to be pleading for something, though no one knew what. He looked exhausted, with muddy paws and a slightly injured snout, as if he had traveled a long distance to get there. The animal walked slowly, as if each step was an arduous task, until, exhausted, he lay down in the middle of the room under the surprised and confused gaze of the children. "Who let this dog in?" Mrs. Davis asked, though her voice carried no reprimand. It was more a mixture of surprise and concern. Some students began to laugh quietly, while others simply looked on with curiosity, waiting to see what would happen next. Emily was the first to react. She slowly got up from her chair and approached the dog carefully. She knew she could scare him, but something in the animal's eyes deeply moved her. When she knelt beside him, the dog lifted his head slowly and looked into the girl's eyes. It was a moment of silent connection, where words were unnecessary. Emily felt a deep sadness in the animal's eyes, something she couldn't explain but that made her reach out to stroke his head. "He's hurt, Mrs. Davis," Emily said softly, almost in a whisper. "He needs help." Jason, always energetic, joined Emily, and other students began to gather around the dog as well. Mrs. Davis, now standing by the blackboard, watched the scene with a tight feeling in her chest. It was impossible not to feel empathy for that dog, who had clearly gone through something difficult. She slowly approached, trying to understand what had happened to the poor animal. "Where do you think he came from?" Jason asked, his voice full of curiosity and concern. "He looks lost and tired." As the children began to gather around the dog, each trying to show their affection and concern in some way, the dog remained lying down, accepting the attention with a silent patience. It was as if he knew he was in a safe place now, surrounded by small beings with big hearts. Mrs. Davis, realizing the seriousness of the situation, decided they needed to do something. She knelt beside Emily and Jason, examining the dog more closely. The animal was thin, as if he hadn't eaten properly in days. His fur, though dirty, was soft to the touch, and his eyes told a story of pain and exhaustion. "We need to find his owner or someone who can help," Mrs. Davis said, trying to remain calm in front of the children. "I'll call the local animal shelter. They'll know what to do." Emily looked at the teacher with concern in her eyes. "But what if he doesn't have an owner? What if he's all alone?" That question hung in the air, bringing an uncomfortable silence to the room. The children, who had initially been excited about the dog's presence, now began to grasp the gravity of the situation. The thought that this animal might be alone in the world, with no one to care for him, deeply affected each of them. And it was in that moment that what had begun as a simple interruption in an ordinary class transformed into something much bigger. The unexpected arrival of that dog not only broke the school's routine but also touched the hearts of everyone present, especially Emily and Jason, who, without knowing it, were about to embark on a journey that would change their lives forever. The news about the dog quickly spread throughout the school, and it didn't take long for other students, teachers, and even the principal to hear about what had happened. Mrs. Davis, who had promised to call the animal shelter, began to realize that the situation was more complex than she had initially thought. The dog, whom the children had affectionately named Buddy, seemed to have taken a liking to the classroom, refusing to leave even when they tried to guide him outside. While they waited for the shelter staff to arrive, something unexpected started to happen. The children, who had initially been merely curious, began to emotionally invest in the dog. Emily, in particular, couldn't take her eyes off Buddy. She felt an inexplicable connection with the animal, as if their sadnesses were somehow intertwined. Jason, always the talkative one, began asking questions about what would happen to Buddy. What will they do with him when they get here? Are they going to take him away? What if he doesn't want to go? These were not easy questions to answer. Mrs. Davis tried to reassure the students, explaining that the shelter was a safe place where Buddy would be well cared for until his owner was found or a new family adopted him. However, deep down, she too felt uneasy. The look in Buddy's eyes, which seemed to carry the weight of a painful past, was affecting everyone. Meanwhile, Emily couldn't stop thinking about what the dog might have gone through. She had always been an empathetic child, and seeing Buddy alone, vulnerable, and lost awakened in her a deep desire to help. She knew that if he went to the shelter, she couldn't guarantee that he would find the loving home he deserved. And more than anything, she feared that Buddy would be taken away from the place where, at least for now, he seemed to find some comfort. During recess, Emily, Jason, and a few other students began to discuss the situation more seriously. Sitting in a corner of the playground, away from the other students, they talked about what could be done to help Buddy. "I've been thinking," Emily began hesitantly, what if we tried to find his owner? We could put up posters around town, ask people if they know anyone who lost a dog. If we do that, maybe we can make sure he goes to a good place." Jason, always ready for a new adventure, immediately agreed. "That's a great idea, Emily. We can go out after school and start looking. Maybe someone in town will recognize him." Other students who were listening also began to get excited about the idea. They wanted to help Buddy, and the idea of searching for his owner seemed like the right thing to do. However, they all knew it wouldn't be an easy task. Over the next few hours, while they waited for the shelter staff to arrive, the children began to plan how they would go about it. Emily, with her love of books and writing skills, started drafting a poster. She drew a simple picture of a dog, with a description of Buddy and a plea for help in finding his owner. "Lost, friendly dog. Responds to the name Buddy. Found at Willow Creek Elementary. Please contact us if you know who his owner is." Emily's words were simple but carried a genuine hope that someone would see the poster and recognize the dog. When Mrs. Davis saw the poster, she was touched by the children's dedication. She knew that while she wanted to protect her students from disappointment, she couldn't stop them from trying. "You kids are very special," she said with a sad smile. "I hope you can find Buddy's owner. But remember, sometimes things don't turn out the way we plan." Those words echoed in Emily's mind. She knew the teacher was right, but she couldn't ignore the feeling that Buddy had appeared in her life for a reason. As the hours passed, the sense of urgency to help him only grew. Finally, the shelter staff arrived. It was two women, one carrying a leash and the other a small first aid kit to treat Buddy's injury. They were greeted with a mix of enthusiasm and concern by the children. Emily and Jason stood off to the side, watching as the women approached Buddy cautiously. Buddy, however, seemed reluctant to move. When one of the women tried to put the leash on him, he took a step back, as if he didn't want to go. His gaze turned to the children, especially to Emily, who was struggling to hold back tears. "He doesn't want to go," Emily whispered, feeling a growing pain in her heart. "He trusts us, he doesn't want to be taken away." The shelter women noticed Buddy's resistance but knew they needed to take him to check his health and ensure his safety. "He needs care," one of them said gently. "We promise we'll take good care of him. And if no one comes forward to claim him, we'll do our best to find him a home." The words were comforting, but the fear that Buddy might be taken away from the place where he had finally found some solace left the children heartbroken. When the leash was finally put on, Buddy gave one last look at Emily, who could no longer hold back her tears. "Please, take good care of him," was all she could say as she watched the dog being led out of the classroom. The sound of Buddy's paws dragging along the corridor echoed in everyone's minds, especially in those of Emily and Jason, who felt they were losing something precious. The days following Buddy's departure were strange and melancholic for the 5th grade students at Willow Creek Elementary. The classroom, which was once filled with laughter and excitement, now seemed to be wrapped in a silent sadness. Emily, who had always been one of the most engaged students, became more withdrawn than ever. She spent the classes in silence, often staring at the classroom door as if she expected Buddy to appear at any moment. Jason was also visibly shaken. He, who usually was at the center of jokes and pranks, now was quieter, often lost in thought. It was clear that Buddy's departure had left a void in the children's hearts, something that even the promises that Buddy was safe at the shelter couldn't alleviate. Emily couldn't stop thinking about what might be happening to Buddy. Was he scared? Was he waiting for them, feeling as lost as she was? These thoughts tormented her, and with each passing day, the anxiety of not knowing Buddy's fate grew inside her. Then, on a rainy afternoon, while Emily was in the school library trying to distract herself with a book, Jason came rushing in. He had a determined look, something Emily hadn't seen in him since Buddy was taken away. "Emily, we need to do something," he said, with an urgency in his voice that made Emily's heart race. "I've been thinking, what if we visit the shelter? Just to see how Buddy is doing. They can't stop us from doing that, right?" Emily was silent for a moment, processing the idea. The fear that something might have happened to Buddy was great, but the need to know was even greater. She finally nodded, agreeing. "Let's do it. We need to see how he's doing." The two of them agreed to meet after school, determined to go to the shelter. When the final bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, Emily and Jason left the school and began walking toward the shelter. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained overcast, reflecting the uncertainty that hung over them. The animal shelter was a few blocks from the school, in an older part of town, surrounded by trees and small houses. When they finally arrived, they stopped in front of the entrance gate, feeling a mixture of nervousness and hope. Emily held Jason's hand, who, despite trying to appear confident, was also visibly apprehensive. As they entered, they were greeted by a friendly woman at the reception desk, who smiled as she saw them. "Can I help you?" she asked in a welcoming tone. Emily, feeling her heart beat faster, stepped forward. "We came to see a dog that was brought here a few days ago. He showed up at our school, and we're worried about him. His name is Buddy." The woman seemed to recognize the name immediately. "Oh, Buddy. Yes, he's here, and he's recovering well. Would you like to see him?" Emily and Jason could hardly believe their luck. The woman led them down a corridor to an area where the animals were kept. When they arrived at the kennel where Buddy was, they saw him lying on a small dog bed, eating slowly from a bowl. When Buddy noticed their presence, he lifted his head, and his eyes sparkled with recognition. "Buddy!" Jason exclaimed, kneeling beside the kennel. The dog got up slowly, walking over to the bars and licking Jason's hand through the gaps. Emily, now with tears in her eyes, knelt beside Jason, petting Buddy as best as she could through the bars. The shelter woman watched the scene with a sympathetic smile. "He's really bonded with you, hasn't he? He's been here since we brought him in, but it seems like he's always been waiting for someone." The woman's words struck a deep chord in Emily and Jason. They knew that Buddy needed them as much as they needed him. Emily felt a lump in her throat as she realized that, although Buddy was physically safe, emotionally, he was still lost. He needed a home, a place where he would feel loved and protected. Jason, always the bold one, looked at the woman and asked, "Can we take him home? We want to take care of him." The woman hesitated for a moment, seeming to consider the situation. "Normally, we only adopt animals out to families who commit to taking care of them full-time. But you two seem to have a special bond with Buddy. I would need to talk to your parents, but maybe we can find a solution." Hope reignited in Emily and Jason's hearts. The idea that Buddy might come home with them seemed almost too good to be true. Emily felt her heart fill with a joy she hadn't felt in days. "Let's talk to our parents," Emily said excitedly. "I'm sure they'll understand." The two left the shelter with a promise to return as soon as possible, this time with their parents, in the hope that they could finally give Buddy the home he deserved. As they walked back home, under the overcast sky that now seemed a little less gloomy, Emily felt a new determination grow within her. She knew that this journey was not over, but now, with the real possibility of adopting Buddy, there was a light at the end of the tunnel. And with this new hope, she and Jason were willing to do whatever it took to give Buddy the life he deserved. Time passed, and Buddy quickly became an essential part of the lives of Emily, Jason, and their families. The dog, who had once shown up at school lost and injured, now flourished in his new home, bringing joy and love to everyone around him. He became an inseparable companion for the children, accompanying them on their daily adventures and sharing precious moments of companionship and affection. Emily and Jason had never felt as connected to anyone as they did to Buddy. With each passing day, the bond between them only grew stronger. Emily, who had always been shy and reserved, found in Buddy a source of courage and confidence. He was there for her in moments of sadness and joy, always ready to offer his unconditional love. Jason, on the other hand, channeled his energy and enthusiasm into caring for Buddy, learning to be more responsible and patient. He loved taking him for walks, playing in the park, and even teaching him a few tricks. Buddy reciprocated all this care with unwavering loyalty, showing Jason that the true meaning of friendship goes far beyond words. At school, Buddy's story became something of a legend among the students. The fifth graders loved telling how the dog had unexpectedly appeared in the classroom and how Emily and Jason had done everything they could to ensure he had a happy ending. Buddy even became an unofficial mascot of the school, with the children frequently asking about him and bringing treats and toys. But Buddy's impact went far beyond just bringing joy to Emily, Jason, and their classmates. He also taught important lessons about empathy, compassion, and responsibility. The story of how he found his home showed everyone that even in the darkest moments, there is always hope, and that love and care can change lives. One day, a few months after Buddy's adoption, Mrs. Davis organized a special activity at school. She asked the students to write an essay about an experience that had changed their lives. For Emily, there was no doubt about what she would write. She sat at her desk, with the soft autumn sunlight streaming through the window, and began to write. In her words, she described how Buddy had appeared in the classroom, lost and vulnerable, and how it had touched her deeply. She wrote about the journey of taking him to the shelter, visiting him again, and the decision to adopt him. But more than anything, she wrote about what Buddy had taught her. "Buddy taught me that true love knows no bounds. He showed me that even when we feel lost and alone, there is always someone willing to help us, to give us a second chance. And sometimes, that second chance is all we need to find our place in the world." When Mrs. Davis read Emily's essay, she couldn't help but be moved. She knew that this story wasn't just about a dog who had found a home, it was about the changes he had brought to the lives of those around him. It was about the power of love and compassion to transform the world, one life at a time. At the end of the school year, during the 5th grade graduation ceremony, Mrs. Davis gave a special speech. She talked about the importance of always being attentive to the needs of others, whether people or animals, and how small acts of kindness can make a big difference. To illustrate her point, she shared Buddy's story, highlighting Emily and Jason's role in the dog's life. "We all learned something valuable from Buddy," Mrs. Davis said, her voice filled with emotion. "He taught us that every living being deserves love and care, and that when we come together in compassion, we can overcome any challenge. Buddy is a living example of how love can heal wounds and change lives, and I'm proud to have witnessed this journey with you." Mrs. Davis's words were met with warm applause, and many in the audience couldn't hold back their tears. Emily and Jason, sitting next to their families, exchanged a smile, feeling a deep gratitude for everything they had experienced. When the ceremony ended, they went home with Buddy, who was now an inseparable part of their lives. And as they walked together, under the sky lit by the setting sun, Emily couldn't help but reflect on how that unexpected encounter had changed everything. Buddy, who had once been lost and alone, now had a home full of love. And by bringing Buddy into their lives, Emily and Jason had also found something precious: the certainty that love, in all its forms, is the most powerful force that exists. That night, as Buddy slept peacefully in his bed, surrounded by the people who loved him, Emily realized that this wasn't just the end of a story but the beginning of many others to come. She knew that no matter what the future held, Buddy would be by her side, as a loyal and faithful friend. And so, life continued in Willow Creek, with Buddy as an inseparable part of a family that had learned, in a deep and moving way, the true meaning of love and friendship. And that is a story they would carry forever in their hearts.